All right, so I'm going to get a little bit more philosophical. Sorry. I'm going to start with the artist Ai Weiwei, who says that if anything, art is about morals, about our belief in humanity. Without that, there is simply no art. I start on the basis that a well-administered democratic state in which citizens are engaged to be knowledgeable and engaged in their communities cannot exist without art. And as I've argued this same point elsewhere, art is vital to a fair and just society, for it is here, it is with art, that we exercise and learn to exercise the social values that we prize: diversity, experimentation, freedom, creativity. This isn't just an aesthetic exercise, it is a moral, social, and political exercise. And activist art is about empowering individuals and communities. This art is a long-standing form of art and is generally situated in some kind of public arena, with artists working closely with a community to generate the art that is also a political intervention. So this is where the philosophy comes in. I'm going to set up this. So there's a historical basis for the social role of art, and I place it in three places. First, art provides an aesthetic experience. Any robot can perceive art, but it's the experience of art that changes our worlds. Historically, the notion of aesthetic experience has been the ground of ancient and modern and medieval theories of beauty. I like the notion of beauty. Whether beauty reflects the harmony of the universe, or sensuously presents the immaterial idea of a universe, or is identified with the sublime or the active nature of existence, it has the power to transport us. It helps us to remember what is important, to be inspired by that importance, and to understand what we hold to be important to life. So art is inspiring, it's mnemonic, it can help us to remember, and it's educational. Now, until the 18th century, theories of beauty centered on how art is not only instructional and useful, but also revelatory of what we hold to be true of the world, what we hold to be the real. It explains what someone holds to be true. That gravity is real, that someone feels pain, that someone might exist, that power is temporary. Remember that. The real in these terms is the true, and historically truth in this sense is related to morals, it's related to goodness. Beauty isn't always about something that seems attractive to us. Beauty is about order, how we organize our lived worlds, how we distribute justice. It's about the truth behind a lie, or many lies. The order that is beauty is the order of our highest values. For thinkers about art for the last 2,000 years or so, truth and beauty and goodness on these terms have constituted fundamental ways that we think about what is important in our worlds. And this means there's never been and should not be any question that one's felt experience, our aesthetic experience of an artwork, is a crucial aspect of our role as informed and engaged community members. So for these reasons, aesthetic experience, or the way we are affected by artworks, is a crucial aspect of the social role of art. Now, in the early 20th century, everything goes downhill. Right? In the early 20th century, a number of changes happened to this social role of art. First, aesthetic experience becomes increasingly identified with religious experience. It doesn't have to be wrong. So with the death of God, people started using art as a desacralized space, or a secular form of belief. One could discuss art and spirit and transcendence in the same sentence because aesthetic experience was now similar to a religious experience. But now one could talk about believing without believing in any particular God. So to be meaningful, art had to move its audience. And at this point, aesthetic experience becomes identified with freedom and sublimity and that which transcends the given world. Now, the second point I want to make here about the social role, is that at the same time, some analytic thinkers about art argue that when aesthetics is reduced, when art is reduced to intuitive, to religious or generally non-conceptual, impossible to articulate ways of experiencing or ways of knowing, it becomes difficult to understand art, right? It is what it is. That sort of thing. What's it all about? What does it mean? This becomes a problem. So these thinkers add that art is meaningful when it can tell us something, when it provides a set of propositions to be understood, that it has a message. So art tells us something about the world, and when we can determine what it is that art asserts, then we know both its meaning and its social role. So we do this all the time. We look for elements of meaning in any artistic meaning, from harmony to noise, from static to a camera angle, from icons to perspectives. Propositional content is what I'm calling this, and it becomes just as important as aesthetic experience in the social role of art. Now, thirdly, the other thing that I see here affecting this social role of art is the promotion of art, which changes in the 20th century. So new arts initiatives, public and private support of arts foundations, the integration of art into education and politics and leisure, for instance, these are all vital to a democratic society. As I've said, this is because it's here that we learn to think critically and to exercise our freedom and to understand experimental visions of our world. And we do this without class or wealth boundaries that we only now consider to be traditional ones. Awareness and appreciation of the arts is not about promoting new commodities, it's about promoting a conversation, promoting new understandings. Now in the 20th century, there's some social changes that make this really difficult. Shifts in the social structures change the paradigms of art support. On the one hand, the growing middle classes didn't really know how to show appreciation for the arts, so they just bought stuff. On the other hand, new mass audiences demanded a democratization of culture where art could and should be accessible to all because it makes life better. But with these new mass audiences came new types of funding, and the funding changed from a patron, somebody you can identify, to corporate sponsorships, things we had to fight for. It became very difficult to send out art at all, to be able to find access to it. So these three elements, the non-expressible element of the experience of art, the need for propositional content in art, tell me what it's about, and the shifting art funding to public and corporate models means that in 20th century and in the 21st century, art took on a remoteness from everyday life. It becomes a realm too often where you could have an experience that could matter only to you, that didn't have to be shared. Moreover, that art that held meaning for you was considered meaningless if you couldn't put it into a propositional content, if you couldn't say what the message is somehow. It becomes very difficult to bring about a political role to the personal effect that happens with art. So when everyday people were either not encouraged to purchase art or put in social conditions which made access to art difficult or uneconomical or unnecessary to life, then the social role of art diminishes in a certain sense and falls away. This, I think, for me, is where activist art steps in. Activist art is art. And its rise happens around the same time that art and aesthetic experience are made increasingly meaningless by modern society. Generally, the goal of activist artists is to create art that both holds social and political power and works as a form of political capital. It's meaningful, it does something. This art is what I think we see with lizsolo's beautiful and inciting music video, with Gerald's sensuously heartbreaking. That was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the fish, that series, with Rhonda Pelley's The Fever, which I find seduces viewers into identifying with the images in some way, and then placing those feelings of home and identity in Newfoundland history smack dab in the middle of this political urgency. These three artists, to my mind, speak directly to power. They don't depict an issue or describe a situation to be interpreted by others, like me. These artists make claims in and through their art that demand a response. And those claims are made powerful as art-based claims because we cannot help but feel and understand their meaning and import. Now, the driving force behind some of my ideas here about art come from a writer and thinker, Iris Murdoch, who I think writes most of the time about love. She argues that aesthetic perception, right, this looking at art, our experiences of art and our integration of art into life leads to a realistic vision of others, a form of attention or attending to others, which Murdoch calls love. And she describes this as the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. That's such a powerful statement. In this way, art and morality are linked. Love is the freedom of having what she claims is an indefinitely extended capacity to imagine the being of others, who, to an extent, we never cease discovering are different from ourselves. Both aesthetic and moral perception are not to be considered merely subjective. They are the real apprehension of the character of another, of particular virtues. This respect for the particular individuality of another is, for Murdoch, the virtue of love. And that's what's bound up with art. Because she holds that aesthetic perception is the only unbiased method of objectively seeing another in their own right, in their own terms, it becomes her model for increasing our capacities for understanding and appreciating other people. In these terms, morality is not a personal liberation by the power of will into an arena of indefinitely free choice, but an attempt to overcome illusion, fantasy, I'm so glad you said that, and convention, or we've always done it that way, by perceiving others realistically or in terms of their own structures and truths and needs. Aesthetic experience or attention is a model of relating to the real and understanding the reality of a situation. It compels us to look, and it holds our attention in a state of unselfing. I'm going to keep on going. All right. So given all this, aesthetic experience in these terms inspires a submission to the authority of the other, of another person, of another thing out there. So in a world where we are always forced to protect ourselves and not to be vulnerable to others, this seems wrong, but I'm arguing it's not. What it means is that to consider something as an artwork, or in the way artworks show a thing to us, is a way of showing us how to consider how a thing really is, rather than how somebody else tells us that it is. As the writer, as Murdoch argues here, aesthetic experience reveals forms, no matter how minute, which invites the unpossessive contemplation of the reality of others and leads to a greater understanding of those others for us. So artists who do not give in to indifferent fantasy or to selfishness, these artists fully attend to a vision and submit it to a reality. Submit this reality to others, to reveal what is true about the world in a way that should invite some sort of reaction with those viewers. So in this way, aesthetic experience illuminates the overlooked or the inconspicuously obvious in everyday life, moving us to attend to what is real and true outside of ourselves. So in this sense, beauty experienced attentively reveals truth. And while we might approach an object with preconceived notions of usefulness or even its prettiness, attending to or submitting to its structure opens up in new ways of experiencing and understanding that thing on its own terms. So we learn to treat others as real as we think ourselves to be. We learn to see the world in completely new ways and to respect what we see and how we are led to see it. We learn to treat new possibilities with the same trust as we treat the tried and true options that we know. We learn to believe other people. My final point is the philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy explains justice like this: I must be given what is due to me, just as others must be given their due. This means that there can never be justice for one person alone. Such a thing doesn't even make sense. Justice exists solely in relation to others. And one could argue here that the work of activist art performs the nature of justice, the nature of the way by which the environment and its people are found to illuminate their own ways to be treated. The point is that, following Nancy, the environment and people of Muskrat Falls require due recognition. The active existence of the place and the people does not need a special kind of justice bestowed upon it, but rather attention, unconditional concern for their own right to free activity. And that is here, I think, activist art reveals that with due recognition, we can open relations between human and natural environments in various ways that enable the free and just activity of each. Thank you.